Was Hamilton's penalty really fair? Or are we facing the cover-up of one of the greatest structural errors in Ferrari since the Vettel era? Today I am going to tell you what no one has told you, the truth behind the classification disaster of the 7-time world champion in Monza. The story begins, as many times in Formula One, with a deceptively simple headline. Lewis Hamilton was penalized with 5 grid positions for the 2025 Monza Grand Prix. The official reason: not having reduced enough low yellow flag during the recognition return in the Zandvoort Grand Prix. But this sanction, which is apparently an application of the regulation, reveals a chain of questionable decisions and a process that leaves more doubts than certainties. When you look closely, it is clear that what happened was not an isolated pilot error, but a manifestation of a deeper crisis within the operational system of Formula One and in particular of Ferrari. First, the moment of penalty is the most disconcerting detail. The sanction was announced more than 3 hours after the end of the race in Zandvoort, when Hamilton had already abandoned after an accident in Tour 22. By then, all telemetry information was now available. The sensors, the radio, the onboard images and the FIA data were there, ready to be evaluated from the moment of the incident. However, the commissioners waited for the weekend to conclude to make a decision that, if applied before, would have completely changed the narrative of the event. Karun Chandhok, Sky F1 analyst, did not hesitate to qualify the timing as very unusual, and had plenty of reason. In a sport where decisions must be made with surgical precision and in millimeter times, the delay in this resolution was a strategic error that affected not only Hamilton, but also to all Ferraris planning for the next race. The fact that the sanction applies to Monza and does not influence Zandvoort reveals a bureaucratic disorder that exposed the penalty system. The justification of the FIA also does not help to dissipate criticism. According to the commissioners, Hamilton raised his foot from the accelerator, but not enough for his taste. That phrase, loaded with ambiguity, unleashes a fundamental technical debate. What is the objective criterion to determine if a speed reduction is sufficient double yellow flag? In other similar cases, such as Verstappen in Monaco 2023 or Alonso in Canada 2022, measurable values such as time or average deceleration were used to define the infraction. On the other hand, in this case, everything seems to have depended on a subjective interpretation of Hamilton's technical gesture. What happened in Monza with Lewis Hamilton goes far beyond a questionable sanction or a bad classification. The real conflict is buried under the red surface of the SF25, a car whose technical philosophy, far from being an evolution, has become a structural problem that is compromising the entire Ferrari season. To understand why the car is the great enemy of Hamilton this year, it is necessary to decompose its architecture, its fundamental weaknesses and how they interact with the driving style of a pilot that requires surgical precision of the rear train. Since its conception, the SF25 was designed to maximize the soil effect operating with the lowest possible height. In theory, this philosophy seeks to generate the highest level of aerodynamic load without the need for oversized ailerons that penalize the speed in line. But in practice, this design has turned out to be a double-edged weapon. The flat background, which should be stable and close to the ground at all times, suffers an unusually high level of wear. In fact, the FIA sensors have systematically recorded a deterioration that exceeds the regulatory millimeter allowed by race, which forced Ferrari to adopt an emergency solution: increase the height of the car. In Monza, where braking are brutal and chicanas require a perfect transition between stability and traction, this problem became evident. Hamilton, whose driving style is based on a clean in curve and a controlled traction at the output, could not extract the potential of the SF25. What for other pilots could be a slight instability, for someone as he represents the loss of vital tenths in each lap. This is not just a trusted problem, it is a mechanical issue. The car does not respond to the pilot's inputs because its architecture has been forced outside its ideal parameters. To this is added another critical point: the rear axle instability under variable load. This is not a lower defect. It is a symptom that the rear suspension fails to maintain the necessary aerodynamic consistency when the car passes from lateral load to longitudinal load. In transitions between braking and acceleration, the SF25 becomes a vehicle of erratic behavior, which forces the pilot to improvise on the march. For Hamilton, accustomed to a millimetrically adjusted machine in Mercedes, this lack of coherence in dynamic behavior is a technical nightmare. The combination of unstable architecture, an aerodynamic philosophy too rigid, and the need to modify the car only to comply with technical legality, places Hamilton in a borderline situation. Each classification session becomes a fight not against its rivals, but against the vehicle itself that should allow it to compete. And the most worrying thing is that, unable to operate the car in its optimal configuration, Ferrari is sacrificing performance in exchange for avoiding regulatory sanctions. It is a double loss, technical and competitive. One of the most shocking revelations after Monza's GP is that Hamilton has had limited access to the simulator compared to what was accustomed in Brackley. And this is not a minor detail. In modern Formula One, where track tests are severely limited by the regulation, the simulator is the main tool to test configurations, validate aerodynamic theories, and adapt the car to the pilot's style. The lack of adequate access or time in the simulator not only delays its adaptation process, but also prevents it from building a technical synergy with track engineers. In other words, Hamilton is not only running with a car that does not understand it all, but also has the complete tools to learn it. But the challenge does not end there. In his attempt to adapt to SF25, Hamilton has begun to modify his own driving style. He has migrated to an approach closer to that of Charles Leclerc, releasing the accelerator before and using the brake more progressively, with the aim of maintaining a faster minimal speed in curve. This type of adjustments requires not only technique but also trust, instinct, and muscle memory. For a pilot who has dominated the category with an aggressive but controlled style, changing the DNA of its piloting in full season is like rewriting the chess rules in the middle of a game. What happened with Lewis Hamilton in the classification of the 2025 Monza Grand Prix cannot be understood as an isolated incident or explained only from the regulation. The so-called filtering, that term that has sneaked into the media narrative to refer to the technical data and sanctions that met lately, has become the perfect excuse to hide a series of more serious, systemic, structural problems. But far from protecting those responsible, this episode has ended up exposing everything that is broken, not only inside Ferrari but in the modern Formula One ecosystem. The case of Hamilton in Monza has made it clear that Ferrari does not have control of his own project. It has been exposed that the car, the SF25, was conceived on aerodynamic principles that do not tolerate any operational deviation. That any attempt to adjust the car to the demands of the current championship either by regulation or by driving style destroys the balance on which it was designed. And that, in a category as tight as Formula One, is equivalent to running without weapons in front of teams such as McLaren or Mercedes, which have understood how to maintain a flexible and adaptable base without sacrificing performance. The filtering also revealed another uncomfortable truth. Ferrari has lost its capacity to anticipate. The penalty to Hamilton, broadcast hours after the event and applied for the following race, is only the most obvious symptom. A team that aspires to fight for titles cannot afford to operate with that level of strategic slowness or with that passivity before the decisions of the FIA. Because if you cannot influence, if you cannot negotiate, if you cannot even react quickly, then you are condemned to be a victim of the system instead of the protagonist. And the human impact of all this is not less. Hamilton, the most successful pilot in history, has ended up trapped in a structure that was not designed for him. He has had to change his piloting, adapt to work philosophies that he does not share, and face a learning curve for which neither the necessary time nor the tools has been provided. His attempt to convert the Ferrari challenge into a redemption narrative is being transformed, little by little, into a story of silent frustration. Because it is not only about results but about the impossibility of creating a real bond with the car, with the team, with the vision of the future. Monza was a mirror. He reflected a vulnerable Hamilton, but not defeated. He reflected Ferrari as a brilliant structure on the outside, but oxidized inside. And reflected Formula One as a category that continues to carry opaque procedures, late decisions, and structures that punish more the form than the background. The filtering, then, is not just a technical fact that came to light. It is an open crack in the official story. A warning for those who still believe that Ferrari's problems are only a matter of time or patience. Because what is failing is not the stopwatch, it is the complete system that surrounds it. And perhaps the most revealing of all is that, in the midst of this storm, Lewis Hamilton has shown that it remains the same usual competitor. Willing to adapt, fight against adversity, and look for answers where others only find excuses. But the question that is open is as simple as brutal. How much more can a champion endure when the car, the team, and the system work against him? Because if Ferrari does not find the right path soon, Monza will not be remembered as an anomaly, but as the beginning of the end of a project that promised history, but that until now has only given disappointment. Now that you know all the hidden details behind what really happened with Lewis Hamilton in the classification of Monza, the inevitable question falls on you. Do you think Ferrari is up to the challenge that represents one of the most successful pilots of all time in their structure? Or do you think this alliance, instead of marking a new era of glory, Is condemned to become a warning more than what happens when talent and structure are not aligned? Leave me your opinion in the comments.